Hello and welcome to the video. This is Age of Wonders 4 Mystic Update 1.3. So we just recently had around the month and a half ago, we had the Eldritch Realms DLC come out. And so far, the developers have been releasing these updates. This is the third of, I don't know how many updates they're going to be releasing, but figured I'd cover this update so that we can go into some detail on what we might expect out there in some of our campaigns. So, first up, I'll read through this and then maybe explain a little bit of my thoughts. So, Enthralled Gaudier, we hope that you have enjoyed the summer season. For these past few weeks, we've continued to work on the Mystic update, undeterred by the insanity brought on through summer heat, storms, and railroad maintenance. The Mystic 1.3 update aims to polish the changes we introduced with the Mystic update. We focused our efforts on tweaking the rank updates and the Eldritch Sovereign, but have also taken along some other requests. The Tome of Corruption has gotten some attention, as have certain units. Beyond that, we've improved the way faction selection and Pantheon settings are handled, and you'll find more fixes for crashes, AI multiplayer, as well as improvements for the modders among us. As the summer enters its second half, our attention will fully shift towards the future, preparing new updates and content. We are dedicated to Age of Wonders 4 and have more to share after the summer. May your Pantheon thrive. So this is actually, before we go into any of these highlights, what's really exciting about this is that the Eldritch Realms was the final DLC that had the roadmap for the developers. But this game, just Age of Wonders 4, has been pretty remarkable. Like I said in a few of my other videos, it reminds me a lot of Civilization 5, and I love that game so much. It's near and dear to my heart. So for them to say that there's more to come after this, perfect. I'm really excited for it. Okay, let's go on to the highlights. So first up, we have unit rank updates. The structures, so the Smith's Guild, which is going to have a little bit more production on recruiting your units. That reduces additional starting ranks from 2 to 1, and then now grants additional starting ranks to tier 1, 2, and 3 units. Okay, that's pretty good. That's not too bad. So it looks like we're going to be having a little bit of a buff and a debuff. So reduced additional starting ranks from 2 to 1. That's a small little debuff that I can see. But it grants additional starting ranks to tier 1, 2, and 3 units, which is great because I believe before that was only doing tier 1 and 2 units. Wizard Tower level 1 now grants +1 rank to tier 1 magic origin units. Yeah, I don't remember them ever granting any ranks to any of these tiers for the magic origin, so perfect. That's really good to see. Wizard Tower level 2 now affects tier 1 and tier 2 magic. I wonder what the verb effect means. So we'll see that here once we start playing a little bit more of our games, what the Wizard Tower looks like. I only really used the Wizard Tower when we needed to get any of our weapons crafted. If I needed to start recruiting some tiered units that required the Wizard Tower. But it looks like we're actually going to have some extra benefits to this. And then lastly, the Wizard Tower Apex now affects tier 1, 2, and 3 magic origin units and increased production cost from 400, 550, which is gold, mana, and production, to 450, 450, and 800. So the 450s are definitely a debuff, but a very large debuff is going to be the 550 to 800 production decrease. So when we're looking at that's 250 production that it just increased. That's a substantial amount. So what that basically means, it's just going to take a little bit longer to create the Wizard Tower Apex. Usually when you're creating the Wizard Tower Apex, you're into the late game. So I'm interested to see how this actually affects the time that we have in the campaign. Additionally, I wonder if the Apex was a little bit overpowered in the way that it gave you a lot of buffs, and because now it's a little bit harder to make, then perhaps it's going to push us towards certain other upgrades of our Pantheon, but of our cities prior to going to the Wizard Tower Apex. Okay, and we go on to the tome content. So the Tome of Cleansing Flame, that is one of the spirit tomes. Special province improvement, Pyre Shrine. No longer grants +1 rank to all produced units. Now grants faithful to non-faithful units and increased base gold from +10 to +15. Okay, so that's a rather large debuff for the +1 rank to all produced units. If you saw some of my gameplay with some of our evolution units, having ranks on our units is super important. The faster we can get them leveled up, the stronger they can become. And for the evolved units, the faster they can evolve to become even stronger. No longer granting a +1 rank to all produced units. That's pretty big. But grants faithful to non-faithful units. So that is a power that's going to allow them to be a little bit stronger. I haven't played too much into the spirit faction right now. I plan to a little bit later, so I'm interested to see how that actually plays out for us. And then the base gold income, that's good. That's basically an increase similar to what you'd see with a mine. So that's basically just adding a mine value to the Tome of Cleansing Flame. The Tome of the Dreadnought, Special Province Improvement War Foundry, now grants +2 ranks to constructs only instead of +1 to produced units. So it's not necessarily a debuff. I believe it's just making it where you can focus more on constructs. I would say that overall, this is probably a good balance because if you want to focus on constructs, you're going to get a pretty good buff with that. You're no longer going to get just a +1 to any unit that gets produced. So I like that. I like that the War Foundry focuses on a certain play style and is not just a generalized item to add to your city. Okay, cool. And now we have the Empire Development, the Astral Skill, Astral Buildings. Switch places with Quickening. Reduced additional ranks for Magic Origin units from +2 to +1. Astral Bindings. Okay, so it switched places with Quickening. Quickening was a little bit closer on the Astral Tree. So Astral Bindings, then it sounds like I need to see where on the Astral Tree it was. So let's actually pull this up. Empire Development. Okay, so on the Astral Tree, oh, I see. Quickening was the last astral skill. Wow. And they're talking about astral binding. So astral binding was the 6th skill on the tree. And now that's a huge debuff. Wow, now I'm looking at this. I would always go for Quickening. Having your spells cast on the first turn of combat was so powerful. I can see why they wanted to change that. Astral Binding is great. New Magic Origin units gain 2 ranks. That's a very strong one, but compared to the Quickening, I would probably need to see how I feel about that update. For me, I think that's okay. I want to play more into the astral game, the astral archetype, and seeing those two switch places. I think that was a good choice. The Quickening was just a strong skill, and to have that later on the astral tree, I think that is definitely a debuff. I don't think that's a buff here. However, I think it does balance the game a lot better. All right, on to society traits. Chosen Uniters no longer grants +1 rank to racial polearms and shield units. Now grants +1 rank to units recruited from Rally of the Lieges. Okay, all right. So we're only going to get that a few times every 20 turns or so. No longer mutually exclusive with Ritual Cannibals, Ruthless Raiders, and Merciless Slavers. So great. Chosen Uniters, you can also play Ritual Cannibals. So it looks like you can be a little bit more aggressive. Ruthless Raiders and Merciless Slavers. Those are just the Chaos factions. So that's great. It looks like we're allowed to have a little bit of different play styles that we can go with. The Devotees of Good no longer grants +1 rank to racial polearms and shield units. Now grants +1 rank to all units while at max good alignment. Wow. Okay. So this is very interesting. This basically means that you have to play pure good, and that can require a lot of sacrifices to be made up front, which is okay, but it does force you down a certain path, and no longer grants 10 stability per level of good, now grants plus 10 gold per level of good alignment instead. That is a debuff. That definitely is. Let me think, because the level of stability is, if you're at 0 to, I believe it's 25, 20 or 25. Then from the next level, the next rank to increase a little bit of production is from that 20 or 25 up to 50. And then from 50 up to 75. And then I believe one more is 75 up to 100. And you can go past 100, but it doesn't increase anything past that. I know that the 10 stability is pretty nice to have, but going to only 10 gold now, yeah, that is a little bit of a debuff. I haven't played Devotees of Good just yet, but I'm excited to see how this will play out. Having a little bit more gold can definitely help. And I would say that the stability changes, the stages of stability changes. That doesn't necessarily mean that it equates to 10 gold. For example, if you're making, say, 200 gold in your city and you have a stability level that's at the second tier, so say you're between 25 and 50, I don't know if that necessarily is going to increase your gold by, say, 20, which in this case it would for your gold. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to see how that plays out. Okay, and we'll scroll down just a little bit. Relentless Crusaders, no longer mutually exclusive with Ritual Cannibals, Ruthless Raiders, and Merciless Slavers. Okay, so a lot of these are no longer mutually exclusive. So what all of these show is that we can just make new types of archetypes of civilizations, which is great. I think that having more ability to play around certain traits is perfect. It allows for a little bit of more open and diverse ways of playing. That's a thumbs up for me. All right, let's go to Fabled Hunters. No longer grants +1 to racial, ranged, and skirmisher units. Units gain +5 magic map, +5 strategic map regen at all times. Okay. Let me think, because I played Fable Hunters before. I do like them, and the reason why I like them is because of the rank. I would usually play this with the evolution archetype. Having having a little bit of extra regen is pretty important. And I think if you base it off your playstyle, if you are playing like the evolution style archetype that I like to play, I think that I would say it just has to depend on your playstyle. So if you are very aggressive and you constantly go for battles, like what I like to do, then you really do want that map regen, because the more health that you can regen over time, especially if you're in your own friendly province, then that allows you to actually do a lot more battles more quickly. So I would say that in the early game, maybe not as great, but once you get into the later game, I'm sure that actually plays out just a little bit better, or just over time, allowing you to be a little bit more aggressive. Okay, Perfectionist Artisans. Oh, yes, this is such a strong buff. So I've wanted to play Perfectionist Artisans a lot, but they had a huge debuff, which was that it reduced the city cap by 1, meaning that you could only create 2 cities. But now that they've actually decreased that or taken away that debuff, this is a really fun improvement for this trait. Just so that everybody understands, Perfectionist Artisans, the items that you're choosing for your city has a higher production value. So it just takes a little bit longer to build these, but it will give you more resources once they're built. Now that you have actually 3 cities instead of 2, I think that's huge. Excited about that one. Let's look at the Runesmiths. No longer grants +1 rank to racial polearms and shield units. Increase research cost discount for unit enchantments from 30% to 40%. Great. The debuff with the +1 rank, but a buff with the discount cost for research. and that's research on unit enchantments. So those are any of those, the if you saw some of my gameplay when we were buffing up the to get higher critical hits for some of these units, those were some of the unit enchantments that we were using. That makes it easier to research these. And I've wanted to play runesmiths a little bit. I think that there are certain ways you can play it. I am trying to see what traits best work for the evolution archetype. Once I'm done with the evolution archetype, I'm definitely moving on to a few of these other ones. But runesmiths seems like something that I might want to look into. Keepers of Knowledge, now mutually exclusive with Chosen Destroyers and Scions of Evil. So Keepers of Knowledge is one of the Spirit Society traits. So basically, that just means you can no longer play Chosen Destroyers and Scions of Evil, which makes sense because if you're going to play the Spirit trait, some of the more evil traits or the shadow traits, Chosen Destroyers are actually a chaos one, but the Scions of Evil, that is a shadow trait. So having that be mutually exclusive makes sense. Again, they're trying to balance these out, but this does limit what types of abilities or what types of society traits we can use together. Powerful Evokers no longer grants +1 to racial, battle, mage, and support units. Damaged combat spells deal 10% more damage. Okay, so that just will make you a little bit stronger on the battlefield. And having the debuff of the rank, it looks like across the board, everything is just getting that debuff on the rank. I would just see this, even though it is a debuff, since everything is removing the +1 rank, then I would say that having the increase in damage, that's a buff. That is nice. So perhaps we'll see maybe stronger outcomes with some of these societies. I haven't used Powerful Evokers too much, but the combat spells, they're really important once you get into the late game, even in the early game a little bit. But some of those late game spells, having 10% more damage is going to do a ton. Now your Scions of Evil no longer grants +1 rank to racial shock and shield units. Now mutually exclusive with Keepers of Knowledge. Okay, so no longer can play with that trait, that society trait. These two cannot work together. That's fine. And just similar to how we talked about that up here. And then lastly, added alignment icon in the description to make it clearer what kind of alignment the rank effect needs. Okay, and I believe that would mean that they added an evil icon. Which would make sense. Having Scions of Evil, having a good icon would not make sense. So an evil icon is probably what they meant, or what they're describing here. Okay, let's go on to the Eldritch Sovereigns. First off, before let's just talk about the society traits real quick. It looks like they're just getting rid of all +1 rank for the majority of these society traits. I believe that there might still be +1 rank for a few of these society traits, but who knows? Maybe they're just trying to reduce the speed at which units can rank up. And that might have been something that was difficult to manage before. Okay, the Eldritch Sovereigns. So their hero skills. Forgotten Tome signature skill are properly forgotten on Ascension. Oh, okay. So once you complete your campaign and you ascend, then these Tome signature skills are actually forgotten. I'm interested to see what that would look like, because that would be your signature skills are the ones at 4, 8, 12, and 16 levels respectively. And I didn't know that they were remaining while they ascended. That makes them extremely powerful. So if they ascend and then they had their signature tome or skills with them, if you went through one of the campaigns and you were level 16 or higher, and then you started a new campaign brand new at level 1, but you had 4 signature skills, gosh, that would make your hero very strong. Okay, signature skill, Cosmic Caster, Cosmic Impulse, Cosmic Pulse. Oh, okay, so they're saying what it does. Fire damage now applies 3 stacks of burning. That's pretty powerful. Increase frost damage from 12 to 30. Wow. And increase lightning damage from 18 to 30. That's pretty strong. The lightning damage, that's only 12 more damage, but the frost damage is another 18 damage. And the fire damage, 3 stacks of burning, that's just you're stacking on top of that stuff. And I believe it's four damage a turn. That's 12 damage a turn burning, which is great. That makes that pretty darn strong. And then hero skill, Eldritch Influence 1, reduce the amount of world and map combat casting points from 15 to 10. Oh, that's a pretty good debuff. And Eldritch Influence 2, again, debuffed down to 10 casting points. That's going to make your spells that you're casting on the strategic map just take a little bit longer to cast. So interested to see, oh, and combat casting. I can't forget about that. Oh, wow. Okay, so you'll be able to cast less spells during combat, and it's going to take you longer to cast spells on the world map. Okay, that's a rather large debuff. I haven't played the Eldritch Sovereigns just yet, but I know that the combat casting points, world map and combat casting points, super important. Okay, rituals. Astral Wisp ritual. Reduce casting cost from 2 thralls and 80 casting points to 1 thrall and 45 casting points. Okay, all right. I think I see how this is going as I'm just reading through these. Perhaps these two, the Eldritch influences, perhaps these two actually aren't too bad of a debuff. It looks like all of these rituals are lowering in their combat points, your casting points. So actually, it might not be that big of a debuff. Everything is lowering in the cost to actually cast. So your Astral Wisp ritual is only 1 thrall and 45 casting points. So pretty much just slashed it by 50%, almost. The casting points just to 45 instead of 40. Your Astral Siphoner ritual, that's down from 5 thralls to 4 thralls and from 200 casting points to 150 casting points. Okay, Quickening ritual. That increased the cost from 2 thralls to 4 thralls and 80 casting points to 150 casting points. And Dark Knowledge increased casting cost from 4 thralls to 6 thralls and 150 casting points to 150 casting points. Okay, so overall, I haven't played this character just yet, but from what I'm seeing on here, they are making maybe some of the easier casting rituals to be easier and more accessible than the harder casting rituals, which will force you down a certain path, or at least make you a little bit more cognizant of when you want to cast some of these higher cost rituals. And then Phantasmal ritual. Increased casting cost from 2 thralls to 3 thralls and 80 casting points to 100 casting points. No longer stacks with status resistance, lowering from Mass Phantasmal ritual. I'm wondering what that would mean. Again, I haven't played this, so it's interesting to see that so what this is basically saying, though, is that the status resistance is no longer being stacked, which means that you don't get a buff. So this would be actually a debuff, and again, another debuff. So I'm wondering if the Phantasmal ritual was a pretty strong ritual that most players were using up front. And then Mass Phantasmal ritual. So increased from 3 thralls to 4 thralls and 100 casting points to 150 casting points, and lowered status resistance from -3 to -2. Okay, that's a pretty good buff. And no longer stacks with status resistance, lowering from Phantasmal ritual. Okay, all right. It looks like it's just evening out. And again, overall, these Eldritch Sovereigns, all of this is just leveling out the playing field for what the developers have probably been seeing throughout the playtime of this patch. So again, I haven't played the Eldritch, but I've seen videos on it. They look really strong and it looks really fun to play. So I'm excited to hop into these games with these guys. All right, going into combat. The various abilities that allow casting extra spells per turn in combat now no longer stack with each other, limiting the player to 2 spells per turn. So what that basically means is no matter what you do, if you increase the number of spells per turn that you can cast, it's going to cap out at 2. So I'm guessing some folks are probably casting multiple spells, like maybe 4 or 5 a turn. And when you do that, that can very easily break the game. Units with the hidden doomed property that are intended to die at the end of combat can no longer be revived by resurgence. Interesting. So resurgence is a very strong signature spell, and that allows for, say, one of your heroes, if they go down during battle, if you have another hero with this resurgence, it can allow them to actually come back from death and be alive again. So it's a very powerful spell. However, I haven't seen the doomed property, but I'm guessing what they mean by doomed, it would be, say, maybe a zombie. That would make sense, or perhaps a summoned animal that you summon, something like that. And then link effects like Enchained Mind and Limited Seal now have priority equal to the unit using it. A higher priority means that higher tier units can remove link effects from lower tier units, but not the other way around. So, Progenitor Golem, tier 5, using its limited seal on a unit means that the Umbral Mistress cannot use its enchained mind on that unit. What they're saying here is if a tier 5 or if a higher tier unit uses its limited seal or enchained mind on a lower tier unit, that lower tier unit is going to be affected. But if that lower tier unit uses one of its abilities on the higher tier unit, it would not be affected. Interesting. So that can change around some of the abilities that you use during combat. All right, factions. We have reworked the way factions are chosen during game setup. Okay, so this is a pretty big update then. Ruler settings are now additive, allowing for more control over which factions appear in your games. Okay, if insufficient rulers are available for the chosen setting, library rulers will be used as a fallback. So basic rulers will be used as a fallback. Custom ruler setting no longer includes library or pantheon rulers. Okay, that's great, because a lot of times you would say, all right, we're going to play with some of these AI, and maybe you forget to click no custom rulers. And then all of a sudden you start seeing your Pantheon rulers that you made ascend. And so that looks like that's what that's doing there. And then the added a library ruler setting. Okay. Added a Pantheon ruler setting. Pantheon rulers can now be set to appear as a hero or as a ruler. Okay, I don't know what they mean by this, because your hero and your ruler, so when you create your faction, you create your ruler, and your ruler is also a hero. But I need to see what they define as a ruler and a hero here. And Pantheon rulers can now be excluded from appearing as a hero or a ruler. Okay. I'll just need to see what that looks like in game, but I'm sure that it makes more sense once you see that. All right, your item forge. Added name variations for each Eldritch Relic damage channel infusion in the item forge. So a relic with fire damage now has the fire spike ability instead of the generic mind spike ability. Okay, all right, cool. So it adds a little bit more immersion and makes it more believable that a fire damage relic would do fire damage instead of just normal generic damage. And then removed Eldritch relics from being included in the pools for generated rewards. Oh, okay, that's a pretty big debuff then. If you aren't going to be able to receive any of those relics, and you're actually going to have to forge them. So large debuff, but then forces maybe the item forge to be played a little bit more than probably what it is already being played as. For modding, when opening the resource browser, it will now show which mod is currently being worked on and allows you to search only through modded resources. Leaving the search blank will show a list of all resources that have been modded. And improved capability for mods when we move resources between packs. In the past, it would only apply the mod if the resource was still in the exact same location. Now it will locate it and apply the changes there. The resource editor is now better at detecting the active mod if the folder name is different from the ACP file name, and level ed will now load in mod resources when opened through the package manager. Okay, I'm not really a modder, so it sounds like this is maybe just making this modding focus a little bit more streamlined. So great. Let's go on to multiplayer. Fixed and out of sync that could occur when releasing a city as a vassal. Okay. Fixed and out of sync that could occur from independent units not evolving, and fixed and out of sync that would occur when destroying a city. Remove food upkeep / income from CRC checks. And combat takeover. Added support for combat takeover to apply to multiple AI sides. Fixed an issue where combat takeover did not work while the other player is the defending side. Fixed an issue where a combat takeover request would be sent to players already involved in the combat. And fixed an issue where the combat takeover would always trigger if you were in a team with an AI player and that AI is involved in the combat. Fixed an issue where combat takeover was not available during retry in hot seat games. Various fixes related to showing which stacks are enabled in the takeover window. Potential fixes for crashes that could occur when accepting / rejecting a combat takeover request. Fixed that combat takeover was not available during retry in hot seat. And fixed the leader portrait showing the wrong leader when using takeover in hot seat. Okay, cool. So it just makes it a little bit easier to do the combat takeover and not make it too difficult for the players. Okay, going on to Pantheon. The Pantheon enabled settings in advanced settings have now been split up into 3 different settings. Enable accession traits, enabled ascended transformation and skills, enable recruiting Pantheon rulers as heroes. And regardless of the settings, you can now always ascend your ruler at the end of the game. Okay, cool. That's fun. Okay, and we got the story realm. Arcalot added a custom tooltip to explain the relation changes between Serena and the Covenant. Added additional clarification that entering the Dreamroot Oak does not require the army to stand on the province center. Okay. So what this is basically just saying is that it makes it a little bit easier to understand the story and for the Dreamroot Oak, which I believe is one of the ancient wonders. Okay, and on to tomes. So the Astral Tome, Tome of Warding, unit Phantasm Warrior, reduced HP from 70 to 60, reduced defense from 6 to 5, melee strike, reduced damage 6 physical, 6 lightning to 6 physical, 4 lightning. So that's actually a pretty large debuff. I wonder if the Phantasm Warrior was just being used so much because that's not only is the HP reduced, that defense is it's a I'm trying to remember if it's a 10%, but it's a certain percentage of damage blocked. So it technically is a little bit more HP that you're losing. Really, I would say that these two combined together, you're losing a sizable chunk of the survivability of this unit. And melee strike. So that just basically means that it has a little bit less elemental damage. Okay, interesting. I've used the Tome of Warding a few times, so I'll need to look at how the Phantasm Warrior works in battle now, and maybe if I need to look at using something else. So let's look at the Materium Tome, and it's the Tome of Rock, unit enchantments, obsidian weapons. Now grants an additional +1 physical damage and +2 for non-repeating attacks. That's great. That's really good. I love using obsidian weapons when I can because that just allows for my units to be just a little bit stronger. It's another unit enchantment. And okay, I might be going with the Tome of the Rock a little bit more often when I play with the evolution archetype. Again, I really want to play with some of these others, but right now with my playthrough, I'm looking at just going through the entire story with the evolution. But if you guys want to see something else, I'm more than happy to look into maybe doing a different archetype as well. Okay, and on to the Shadow Tome of Corruption. City structure, Throne of Insidious Whispers, reduced insanity duration from 3 turns to 1 turn. Oh man, that's a huge debuff. Insanity is such a strong skill because it really makes your enemy start just attacking its own guys pretty relentlessly, and only doing that for 1 turn instead of 3, pretty large debuff. Now correctly mentions it can only be built in the Throne City. Okay, fair enough. And unit Umbral Mistress, Fury, reduced the duration of insanity from 3 turns to 1 turn. Yeah, that's a pretty big debuff for the Umbral Mistress. And I'll see how that plays out. I played the Umbral Mistress. She's strong, and I perhaps this was the right choice, but from 3 turns to 1 turn, that might be too big of a debuff. But we'll see. We'll see, because the Umbral Mistress is a tier 4 unit, and she's strong in many of the aspects of this game, but the Insanity is a pretty strong element to have, just because it turns the enemy units on each other. Okay, going into the Umbral Abyss. Updated a number of texts to make the type of free city a text to insert instead of always linking to the free city game concept, so we can dynamically fill it in for text in PvE, war, coordination, and trade. The Fallen Bastion event in the Castle Ruin Ancient Wonder in the Umbral Abyss has an option to pay mana without explaining that it would remove the Rampant Umbral trait Combat Enchantment. This has now been added to the buttons tooltip. And Umbral Dwellings now more frequently ask to declare war on other rulers during demand events. Before, this was a very low chance of happening if there were free cities available. Now it's about a 50-50 if both a valid free city and ruler can be found. The Umbral Thrall's race now has a 1 less society trait randomized each playthrough, as their innate Umbral Thrall society trait takes 1 of their spots. Before this change, they had a 3 society trait, which normally isn't allowed. Oh yeah, that having 3 society traits can make some of the Umbral Thralls a little bit stronger. So having them just have 2 is normal for all of them, including the players. So the Eldritch Pact spells. World spell, Pale of Gloom, can no longer terraform uninhabitable provinces into gloom terrain. World map spell, Umbral Rift, now targets a sector in the Umbral Abyss rather than a single hex. Okay, so that's, I'd say, 6 hexes. Okay, interesting. That's a pretty big buff. Combat spell, Umbral Exile. Any independent units exiled to the Umbral Abyss will now die instead of being moved to the Umbral Abyss. Oh, okay. Wow, that's great. That's pretty powerful if they're actually just killing those units instead of just moving them. Onto the units. Bone Dragons and Reapers are now always considered magic origin. Okay. Unit passive, Curse Eater, now disables the unit has the burn status effect. Okay. Unit Abductor, no longer able to abduct invulnerable units. I didn't know that they could abduct them. The Abductor is pretty strong if you have a strong enough front line and more units to protect it, because it just deletes a unit, and then for the rest of the game, it just basically spawns these smaller units. So Unit Phoenix, increased HP from 110 to 120, increased defense from 4 to 5. Charge Strike now has a 90% chance to inflict burn, and Overheat, increased damage from 20 to 22, changed from a 90% burn, inflict burning, to guaranteed burning. Okay, cool. So the Phoenix, I love the Phoenix. It's a tier 4 unit, and it's just one of the elemental units that's just a very strong unit to have on the battlefield for you. So to see that increase in the value, perhaps we'll see more people playing around that type of unit or adding them more into your army. Okay, on to the world map. Alignment warning has been changed, so it will always wane upwards towards your starting alignment when below that amount, instead of always waning upwards towards 10 alignment. Okay, so what that basically means is, say you have a minus 10 starting alignment. If you go down to, say, minus 20 starting alignment, it's not going to start moving upwards towards 10 alignment. It will stop at the minus 10 alignment instead of the plus 10 alignment. Okay, cool. So that just keeps you at where you were prior to doing any of the evil or good deeds that you were doing. Okay, duration pins for all outposts operations are now enabled and visible for everyone. So anyone can notice that an upgrade is being built and how long it will take to complete without having to select the outpost. Interesting. I'm interested to see what those pins look like, because say someone's building walls on an outpost. You really want to know how long that's going to be when that'll be finished. And to see that pretty quickly, that would be helpful to have your guys move in and take over that outpost or making a work camp or something like that. Okay, free cities can no longer take over nodes that are on a different layer than they own a province on. So I think what they're saying is they can't go into the underground with their city if they aren't underground, if they don't start underground. So if they start on the surface layer, then their city's only going to expand through the surface layer. Okay, that limits the free cities movement. So interesting. I'm actually really interested to see how that will play out. But what it'll probably make is just larger cities on the surface level or whatever layer they're on. Echo casting. The Mystic Attunement world map ability can no longer be used multiple times on the same spell. Okay, I haven't used the Mystic Attunement world map ability, but I'm interested to see how that plays out. But that's definitely a debuff, so we'll see what happens from there. And on to the fixes. Okay, I don't think I'm going to go too much into the fixes because it just looks like these are very specific fixes. So let's see if there's anything else. Okay, that doesn't look like there's anything else on here. So what I'm gonna do is gonna probably hop into some games here later, but I'm really excited to see how these updates have changed the world, have made the game better. I love Age of Wonders 4, so I'm excited to play it more. I hope you guys are excited as well, and I will see you guys out in the world. All right, talk to you later.